Cedar Creek Medical in Savannah smells like antiseptic and floor wax under fluorescent lights that buzz at exactly 60 Hz if you've ever counted, which Megan O'Brien had during a long night shift in 2019 when insomnia and muscle memory wouldn't let her sleep. She moves through the ICU with the kind of steady competence that makes people uncomfortable without knowing why. Not rushed. Not slow. Efficient in the way that only comes from having once moved through corridors where the wrong pace meant someone didn't go home. Her badge reads RN and nothing else. Bachelor's degree in nursing from Georgia Southern, 3 years at Cedar Creek, night shift only, always volunteering for the trauma bays where most nurses request transfers away from. The younger residents notice her hands first. Small, scarred across the knuckles, the kind of hands that belong to someone who's held things together under pressure. She inserts a peripheral full line on a post-op patient in room 406, the needle sliding through skin and into the vein with a single smooth motion, no fumbling, no second attempts. The resident watching, a third year from Emory with $140,000 in debt and something to prove, counts it as another data point in a pattern he doesn't like. She finds Dr. Mercer in the medication room at 2,247 hours, restocking saline bags on the lower shelf with her back to the door. Dr. Mercer, I'm requesting additional trauma bay shifts. Her voice sits low in her throat, controlled, the kind of calm that doesn't ask permission but announces intention. I know the schedule's posted through June, but if there are gaps in coverage. He looks up from his laptop, adjusting his Rolex with the kind of deliberate motion that makes sure she sees it. Dr. Sterling Mercer, Dartmouth Medical School, fellowship at Johns Hopkins, family money from his mother's side going back to railroad interests in the 1890s. His watch costs more than her monthly rent. He studies her with the expression of someone examining a smudge on his windshield. Your current assignment is adequate. He doesn't look at her face when he speaks, a technique he's perfected. Looking at her face means acknowledging her as a peer. Night shift, standard rotation. That's what you signed up for. I have experience with multi-trauma cases. Still controlled. Still that voice like someone who learned speech in places where volume was a tactical liability. I could assist in the bay during critical presentations. You could stay in your lane. He turns back to his laptop, making a note with a pen that probably costs $300. We have residents for complex cases. You have a nursing degree, not an MD. The distinction matters. The silence that follows lasts exactly 4 seconds. Megan doesn't argue. Doesn't defend herself. Doesn't even change her expression. She restocks 3 more saline bags with the same mechanical precision, each movement exactly the same as the last, then walks out of the medication room without responding. This is what Mercer doesn't understand. He thinks her silence is acceptance. It's actually the sound of someone making a mental note. Room 412 is at the end of the west corridor, past the medication distribution station and the supply closet that no one uses because it's always locked. The Army Ranger has been there for 847 days. 2 years, 4 months, 17 days. His name is Marcus Webb, 28 years old, 73 inches tall, 165 pounds, weight lost since admission from the baseline of 185. Catastrophic traumatic brain injury secondary to IED fragmentation, Hindu Kush Valley, Logar Province, a patrol that went wrong in ways that the classified after-action report attributes to intelligence failure and bad luck in equal measure. His speech center is gone. The broker's area, completely destroyed. Not a stroke, not aphasia, not something that might recover with time and therapy. Physical destruction. The shrapnel that tore through his frontal lobe left no tissue to regenerate. He sits in the bed in a semi-reclined position, eyes open but not tracking. Not vacant exactly, more like a person looking through a window at something on the other side that he can't quite see. The television mounted on the wall is always on. He never watches it. Megan checks his vital signs with the methodical precision of someone who's done this 847 times and will do it 847 more times if that's what the job requires. Blood pressure 118/76, heart rate 62 and steady, O2 sat 96% on room air. She adjusts his pillow, moving his head with the careful support of someone handling something fragile, though his skull is reinforced with a titanium plate under his scalp, a fact that never makes it less fragile somehow. The foresight on his left arm shows no signs of infiltration. His nutrition tube is patent and clean. She notices the tattoo on his right forearm without really seeing it at first, the way you notice a water stain on a ceiling you've looked at 1,000 times. Faded ink, blurred by scarring, letters that might be a name or might be coordinates or might be something that mattered to him 2 years ago before the Hindu Kush took his ability to tell anyone what anything means anymore. She leans closer, trying to read the letters. The first one's an M. The second's an E. The rest blur into the puckered surgical scars that run the length of his forearm. She makes a note in his chart, skin intact, vital stable, no acute changes, and moves to the next room. She doesn't see Dr. Mercer watching from the doorway of room 410, didn't hear him arrive, doesn't notice the expression on his face like he's watching someone steal something valuable. He stands there for 14 seconds, then walks to the nursing station where he pulls up Megan's file on the secure network. Georgia Southern University, Bachelor of Science in Nursing, graduated 2020. Basic Life Support Certification, Advanced Cardiovascular Life Support, Pediatric Advanced Life Support. No Emergency Medicine Residency. No Trauma Surgery Fellowship. No Physician Assistant degree. No anything beyond exactly what the law requires to push medications and monitor machines and stay out of the way while real doctors make real decisions. He reads her 3 performance reviews, each one stamped with a word he's learned to hate from everyone in the hospital who isn't him, competent. One review notes her exceptional calm in high-acuity situations. Another mentions her intuitive understanding of patient physiology. The current department director, someone Mercer actively outmaneuvered during the last budget cycle, writes, Nurse O'Brien consistently demonstrates clinical judgment that exceeds her credentials. Mercer closes the file. He pulls up his email and opens a blank message to the Director of Medical Affairs. His fingers hover over the keyboard for exactly 3 seconds before he realizes what he's about to do, and then he closes the email instead, because going after her in writing leaves a trail. Better to move subtly. Better to make her earn the attention by accumulating small violations, boundary crossings, the kind of ambitious overreach that happens when nurses forget their place in the hierarchy. He has time. He has institutional authority. He has resources and connections that go back to his grandfather's friendship with the former governor. What he doesn't have is an explanation for why a nurse with a bachelor's degree and 3 years of experience makes him feel like the air pressure in the room changes when she walks past. The rest of Megan's shift unfolds in the quiet rhythm of night nursing. Vital signs checked every 2 hours. Medications administered on schedule, for bags changed, dressings inspected, charting completed with the kind of meticulous attention that makes the electronic medical record look like someone's doctoral thesis. By 05:30, when the night begins to lighten into morning and the incoming day shift starts their ritual of reviewing overnight reports, she's handled for acute changes, 2 elevated temperatures that she caught before they became septic, a trending low potassium that she flagged for the hospitalist, a patient with early signs of heart failure who got a diuretic order before his lungs actually started filling with fluid. Nothing that will make the news. Nothing that even registers as unusual to anyone paying attention to usual things. The kind of work that prevents disasters nobody ever knows almost happened. She passes the mute ranger in room for 12 one more time before leaving, checks his lines one final time, notes that the tattoo on his arm catches the morning light coming through the window. The letters still blur together. ME and then something, and then the puckered scars. She'll probably never know what name got written on a soldier's skin and then halfway erased by fragmentation and field dressings and whatever happened between the moment he got inked and the moment a bomb decided his story was over. She clocks out at 0700, walks through the parking lot where Savannah's humidity is already rising like a wall, and drives home to a single-story house on Victory Drive where the air conditioning tastes like it's running on a timer. In exactly 480 seconds, Dr. Mercer will arrive for morning rounds. In exactly 14,400 seconds, for hours, Megan will wake up, because even after 3 years of night shift, her body still remembers what it's like to sleep in a war zone and wake up to sirens. In exactly 1,209,600 seconds, 14 days, the mute ranger in room for 12 will hear a voice he hasn't heard in 2 years and whisper a single word that will change everything. But that's not where this story goes yet. That's not how the next chapter unfolds. Right now, in this moment, she's just a nurse sleeping in a civilian bed, and Dr. Mercer is about to discover that every institution has a hierarchy, and sometimes the person at the bottom of the official one is actually standing somewhere else entirely. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical drone as Dr. Mercer arranged the residents like chess pieces around the nurses' station at Cedar Creek Medical. 12 of them. Fresh from their Ivy League programs, still soft around the edges, still believing that prestige meant competence. For attending stood behind them, senior enough to know better, invested enough in hierarchy to watch what came next without intervention. Mercer had called it grand rounds. What it actually was, Megan understood before he opened his mouth, was a public execution dressed up in medical terminology. She stood at the medication cart 3 stations down the hallway, within earshot but far enough that she could pretend to work. Her hands moved through the motions, checking labels, verifying doses, performing the 1,000 small rituals that kept her visible but separate. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a sterile white, making her scrubs look like a uniform she hadn't earned in any official sense. "Let's discuss Nurse O'Brien's decision-making process," Mercer said, his voice carrying that particular pitch he used when performing for an audience. "The motorcycle crash victim from last week. 63-year-old male, acute respiratory distress, and what did our trauma bay nurse decide to do?" Megan didn't look up. She knew what came next. She'd lived through variations of this before, in different hospitals, different cities, always the same script. A man with letters after his name explaining why a woman without them shouldn't have made a choice that saved a life. "She intubated," Mercer continued, pulling the patient chart onto the overhead screen. The image cast a blue glow across the residents' faces. Without waiting for physician assessment. Without protocols. Based on what, exactly? A hunch? YouTube University? The residents laughed. That nervous kind of laughter that wasn't quite sure if it was permitted, testing the waters of their hierarchy, sensing that Mercer had given them permission to find humor in someone else's transgression. One of the attendings, Dr. Sharma, who actually knew how to read a room, didn't laugh. She stared at Mercer with the expression of someone watching a man dig a hole and wondering how deep he planned to go. The patient presented with a Glasgow coma scale of 8, Mercer was saying now, pointing at the chart. Airway not immediately threatened. The appropriate response was observation, maybe a fiber optic scope if deterioration occurred. Instead, we have a nurse making physician-level decisions. Scope creep. Liability. A perfect example of what happens when people forget their place in the institutional hierarchy. Megan's jaw tightened. Just a fraction. Just enough that she felt the muscle clench and then released it, controlling her face the way she'd controlled a Black Hawk's approach vector in Kandahar dust storms, precise, methodical, showing nothing. She counted her breaths. 7 in, hold for 4, 7 out. The meditation of trained compartmentalization. The medication cart in front of her became the center of the universe. The bottles and syringes and sterile packages had weight, had purpose, had rules she could follow. She organized them by color. Red tags. Blue tags. Yellow. Creating order from the chaos of institutional politics, which had always been the easiest way to survive places that didn't want her there. Mercer finished his lecture 5 minutes later. She heard the residents' voices as they dispersed, the attendings moving back to their rounds, the normal rhythm of the hospital reasserting itself like a creature shaking off sleep. She waited. She didn't know why. Some part of her needed to hear if he would stop, or if he would come find her. If this was a moment or a campaign. She would have her answer by the end of the shift. The vending machine was on the 3rd floor, tucked into an alcove near the cardiac unit. It dispensed coffee that tasted like burnt plastic and regret, and Megan had been buying it for 3 years because it was there and because the ritual of it, coins into the slot, button pressed, cup dropped, was something predictable in a world that had become entirely unpredictable. Her last day off had been 6 months ago. Before that, 3 months. The hospital had become geography in a way Savannah never quite was, a place with its own weather and its own rules and its own language that she spoke fluently but was never quite permitted to use. She was feeding coins into the machine when Mercer appeared at the end of the hallway. "You know what the problem is with people like you." His voice was loud enough to carry. Loud enough that the 2 nurses restocking the crash cart around the corner could hear it. Loud enough that the paramedics dropping off a patient to the admitting desk would catch the tone, if not the words. You watch a few YouTube videos and you think you understand medicine. You see one crisis and suddenly you're a trauma surgeon. Megan pressed the button for black coffee. The machine gurgled and hissed. She didn't turn around. "The patient lived, which I understand isn't always your priority," she said. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't shout. She didn't perform. She simply spoke the sentence into the space between them with the same careful precision she would have used to describe a lab value or a drug interaction. Then she took her coffee from the dispenser, turned, and walked past him toward the stairwell. She saw his face. The color rising from his neck like a thermometer, spreading up through his jaw, pooling in his temples. The smirk gone. The performance abandoned. Just a man confronting the reality that he'd miscalculated, that he'd brought an institutional weapon to a fight with someone who'd already survived far worse than public humiliation. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the machine started again. The ventilators wheezed. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The world reasserted its indifference to his rage. Megan climbed the stairs to the 4th floor where room for 12 waited, where the mute ranger lay staring at a ceiling he'd been staring at for 2 years, where a man whose name she couldn't quite remember was slowly dying from a misdiagnosis that nobody else had caught. She had 36 more hours on this rotation. 36 hours to finish what she'd started, to document what she'd seen, to make sure the next person who came through didn't have to fight for treatment the way so many did. 2 days later, the ranger's roommate began seizing. The time was 2:07 a.m. Megan knew because she'd glanced at the monitor when she came in at midnight, the way she always did, checking the baseline vitals of patients in transition, post-surgical, post-traumatic, existing in that liminal space between crisis and stability. The 60-year-old post-op patient had been stable then. Breathing easy. Sinus rhythm. No flags, no warnings, nothing in his presentation that suggested the disaster unfolding beneath his ribs. She was 3 rooms down when she heard the sound. Not the alarm came a second later, but the sound of the ventilator's rhythm changing, the mechanical breath becoming erratic as the man's body seized and convulsed in the darkness. She moved before the alarm registered. Muscle memory taking over. 2,000 shifts. Hundreds of codes. Thousands of moments where the difference between moving fast and moving slow was the difference between living and dying. The room came into focus as she entered. The seizure, yes, but something else. The neck veins distended like cords. The chest rising but only on one side. The trachea pushed against the midline. The patient's face darkening because his lungs were being compressed by something the surgeons hadn't seen 3 days ago when they closed him up and called it good. Tension pneumothorax. Air trapped in the pleural space. Pressure building with every breath, collapsing the lung, pushing the heart aside, killing him by inches while machines watched and did nothing. She had 90 seconds before cardiac arrest. Maybe less. The crash cart was outside the door. The 14-gauge needle was where it always was, top drawer, right side, next to the syringes and the alcohol prep pads. She grabbed it, tore open the packaging, found the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, counted ribs by touch the way she'd counted them in the dark in a cave 200 miles from the nearest hospital where a 17-year-old Marine had a tension pneumothorax and no surgeon for 6 hours. "Stop!" Mercer's voice came from the doorway. "You don't have authority for that procedure." She ignored him. The way she ignored wind, and cold, and the voice of fear. The needle went in. The immediate hiss of air escaping, pressure releasing, the beautiful sound of physics correcting itself. The man's oxygen saturation climbed on the monitor. 72 to 85. 85 to 94. His breathing normalized. His face faded from purple back toward human. "You just ended your career," Mercer said quietly. Megan washed her hands at the sink, dried them, documented the intervention in the chart with the precision of someone who'd already lived through worse consequences than institutional rage. The mute ranger in the next bed watched everything with dark, hollow eyes that seemed to recognize something she couldn't yet name. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song, indifferent to everything, to Mercer's threats, to Megan's competence, to the fact that a man would live to see his grandchildren because someone had refused to stay in her lane. The seizure started at 2:07 a.m. Megan was charting in the station when the monitor alarm pierced the fluorescent hum, not the ranger's bed, but the room next door. The post-surgical patient. 60 years old. 3 days out from a bowel resection. His body convulsing against the restraints like a thing trying to escape itself. She moved before thinking. Before protocols. Before permission. The seizure wasn't the problem. The seizure was the symptom. She saw it in the patient's color, that terrible cyanotic blue spreading from his fingertips inward. She saw it in the way his chest wall moved asymmetrically, the right side lagging, falling behind the rhythm of his left. She saw it in the way his oxygen saturation was dropping despite supplemental flow, 94, 91, 88, 86. Falling like a stone. Tension pneumothorax. The missed rib fracture during surgery had punctured something. Air in the pleural space. His lung collapsing. The seizure was his brain screaming for oxygen. She didn't call for backup. She didn't announce herself. Muscle memory took over, the kind that comes from cave medical bays and burning helicopter rotors and forward operating bases where you don't have backup, where you are the backup. The crash cart was 5 steps. The 14-gauge angiocath needle was in her hand before her conscious mind finished processing the decision. She positioned him supine. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. The anatomy was geometry. The landmark was a whisper in her muscle memory. The needle went in. The hiss of air escaping was like opening a valve on a pressurized tank, sudden, violent, absolute. 30 milliliters of air evacuated in under 2 seconds. The patient's seizure stopped. Mid-convulsion, his body went slack. His oxygen saturation began climbing, 86, 89, 92, 95. Steady. Normal. 40 seconds. That was the entire procedure. 40 seconds between death and life. The monitor returned to sinus rhythm. A normal, beautiful, utterly ordinary heartbeat. That was when Dr. Mercer arrived. He didn't appear in the doorway. He materialized in it, his face registering the scene in sequence, the patient, the blood on Megan's gloved hand, the 14-gauge needle, her face. His jaw clenched like he was trying to crush something between his teeth. "What did you just do?" His voice was very quiet. Very controlled. Very dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with medicine. "Needle decompression," Megan said. She was already assessing the patient. "Breath sounds. Bilateral. Good. Tension pneumothorax. Missed fracture. He was seizing from hypoxia." "You." Mercer stepped forward, his presence filling the room like an electrical charge. "You do not perform procedures. You do not diagnose. You do not make clinical decisions. Do you understand what you just did?" Megan was already documenting. Already collecting the evidence. The seizure would be on the monitor tape. The O2 desaturation would be there. The sudden recovery would be there. The timeline would be irrefutable. "I stopped his seizure," she said. Her voice was level. Factual. The voice of someone reciting the weather. "You committed assault," Mercer said. "You practiced medicine without a license. You violated his autonomy and his consent. You created a legal exposure for this hospital that I am about to make sure is 7 figures minimum. He pulled out his phone. Started photographing the scene. Photographing her. Photographing the patient's chart on the monitor screen. What's your name for the record? Megan O'Brien. He smiled then. It was the smile of someone who had just found exactly what he was looking for. By the time the sun rose over Savannah, Dr. Mercer had filed 17 pages of documentation with the hospital board. 17. The stack looked like a manifesto written in bureaucratic fury. Violation of Nursing Practice Act, Section 4.2.1. Practicing medicine without a license, Georgia Code 43-34-48. Creating tort liability through unauthorized medical intervention. Endangering patient safety protocols. Gross insubordination. Each complaint was stamped, copied, routed through every administrative channel that existed. He had even attached copies of state regulations, highlighted in yellow like a student cramming for an exam. He had attached precedent cases, 3 of them, each one a nightmare for nurses who had overstepped. He had written a memo to the CEO requesting immediate suspension pending investigation. He had emailed the hospital's malpractice insurance carrier, alerting them to a potential claim. He had even called the State Board of Nursing, reporting the incident as a formal complaint. By 10 a.m., the CEO's assistant was calling Megan's extension. The administrator will see you now. The office was on the 3rd floor. Corner room with a view of the river. Gerald Smith's son was in his early 60s, silver-haired, the kind of administrator who had learned to survive by never taking sides too early. He had Dr. Mercer's entire documentation spread across his desk like a crime scene photo array. "Sit down," he said. Not unkind. Just tired. I need you to explain your medical training. Megan Saturday. The chair was leather. Expensive. The kind of chair that cost more than she made in a month. She could see the river through the windows behind him. The Savannah River. The water looked like it was moving very slowly. Like it had nowhere to be. What do you want me to explain? She asked. Your credentials. Your background. Dr. Mercer has filed reports indicating you performed an advanced medical procedure, a needle decompression, without authorization. I've reviewed your file. Your credentials are basic nursing. No advanced certifications. No physician extender training. Yet you appear to have performed this procedure with clinical precision. He leaned back in his chair. That troubles me. Help me understand how you know to do that. The paws stretched like taffy. Megan could hear the river. Could hear the traffic from Bay Street below. Could hear the fluorescent lights humming their eternal mechanical song. I can't discuss my background, she said. His expression shifted. Changed into something sadder and more certain. You're saying you can't or you won't. Can't. Because? She didn't answer. He sat forward then. Folded his hands on the desk. Megan, I'm trying to help you. I am. But I have a director of emergency medicine with 17 pages of formal complaints. I have a hospital board that will convene this afternoon. I have malpractice insurance carriers waiting for an explanation. And I have a nurse who tells me she can't explain her own medical knowledge. He closed his eyes briefly. If you have military experience, I can't discuss it. Or if there's some kind of classified background, I can't. Then I have no choice. His voice had gone very quiet. By law, I'm obligated to report this incident. By policy, I'm obligated to suspend you pending investigation. And by every precedent we have, I'm obligated to protect this institution from liability. He made a call. Security arrived within 4 minutes. 2 guards in blue uniforms with clipboards and that particular kind of professional neutrality that meant they had done this before. They didn't look at her with pity or anger. Just professional distance. Just the job. They walked her down 4 flights of stairs. Through the main lobby of Cedar Creek Medical. Past the information desk. Past the admitting windows where visitors checked in their dying and their broken. Past the gift shop that sold balloons and cheap flowers. Dr. Mercer was standing near the elevators. Watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His face said everything. His face said he had won. His face said that the problem had been solved and that he was good at solving problems and that this was what happened when nurses forgot their place. The security guards walked her to the parking lot. It was November. The heat of Savannah summer was finally starting to release its grip, and the morning air had that particular quality of being slightly less suffocating than usual. One of the guards, a woman named Patricia based on her nameplate, handed Megan a box of items. Her locker contents. Stethoscope. A pair of scissors. A photograph of her son. A folded flag, carefully wrapped in her spare scrubs. Just a small square of fabric, but it was heavy. Everything in the box was heavy. Where do I go? Megan asked. For the investigation. HR will contact you, Patricia said. She didn't make eye contact. They'll arrange a meeting. You might want a lawyer. The drive home was quiet. The roads of Savannah unfolded like a map of her own defeat. The parking lot of her apartment building looked the same as always, beaten white asphalt, a few oak trees with Spanish moss hanging down like the beards of old men, the usual absence of anything significant. She sat in her car for a very long time. The box was on the passenger seat. The flag was in there, wrapped in blue scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and failure. The Hindu Kush mountains had taken everything once already. She had come back from that. She had rebuilt. She had become someone invisible enough to be useful. Someone quiet enough to save lives without drawing attention. And then she had drawn attention. And now she was a nurse again. Just a nurse. No captain. No classified background. No Copper Sunrise designation that didn't officially exist. Just a woman with a box of belongings and a suspended license and 17 pages of documentation from a man who smelled like cologne and entitlement. Her phone buzzed. A message from her son, Marcus. 13 years old. Still at school. Mom, remember that thing you were supposed to help with? It's happening tonight. You home? She looked at her phone for a long moment. She looked at the flag in the box. She looked at the hospital building in her rearview mirror. Then she started the engine and drove home to pack. Because sometimes you lose everything twice. And the second time, you don't come back. By 6 in the morning, Dr. Mercer had filled 17 pages. Violation of scope of practice. Practicing medicine without a license. Creating legal exposure for the hospital. Each form stamped in triplicate, routed through every administrative channel that could end a career. The hospital board would have them by 7. By 8, they would begin their review. By noon, her termination would be processed. Megan knew this because she'd seen it before. Not at Cedar Creek Medical, but in other places, with other names, other uniforms. The Pentagon had taught her how bureaucracies worked, how paperwork could erase a person more completely than any explosion. How the right documentation, filed in the right order, to the right people, could make someone disappear. The seizure had been textbook tension pneumothorax. The roommate's rib had fractured days ago, undiagnosed. When the jagged edge finally nicked the lung, air filled the thoracic cavity with each breath. The pressure collapsed the heart. Stopped the blood flow. Killed the patient in under 90 seconds if someone didn't decompress the chest cavity. She'd grabbed a 14-gauge needle, felt the angle, slid it between the ribs into the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. The hiss of air escaping. O2 climbing. The patient stabilized. Dr. Mercer had stood there, mouth open, watching her save a life he was too slow to reach. Then he'd walked out. And that walk had taken him straight to the administrative offices. Security arrived at noon. A woman with a radio clipped to her belt, professional but apologetic. Hospital's decision is final, she said quietly, not meeting Megan's eyes. The other nurses didn't say goodbye. Not because they didn't care, she could see it on their faces, the quiet fury, but because saying goodbye would implicate them. Association was contagion. One wrong word and they'd be next. Megan carried her locker's contents in a cardboard box. A photograph of her son at 14. A coffee mug from a deployment she couldn't name. 3 pens with hospital logos. A pair of compression socks. Nothing that mattered. Nothing that told the truth. The parking lot was grey under November clouds. Her 2009 Subaru sat where it always did. She set the box on the passenger seat and drove without thinking, following muscle memory through downtown Savannah, watching the city blur past the windows like a memory that wasn't hers anymore. 3 in the morning found her at the Waffle House on Victory Drive. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer. A trucker ate scattered, smothered, covered hash browns 3 booths away. The waitress had stopped refilling her coffee after the second cup. Megan didn't blame her. There was nothing to refill. The cup sat cold and untouched, and in its dark surface, she saw the reflection of a woman who'd saved lives across 2 continents and had nothing to show for it except erasure. Twice erased. That was the phrase that wouldn't stop circling. The Pentagon had erased Captain Megan O'Brien in 2019, classified files shredded, service records voided, her existence reclassified under a designation that officially didn't exist. Copper sunrise. Black ops don't leave footprints. They leave ghosts. She'd accepted it because the work mattered, because 342 soldiers had come home because of missions no one would ever discuss. She could live as a ghost for them. But she hadn't expected to be erased again. Not like this. Not by someone who'd never heard a single shot fired in anger, who'd learned medicine in libraries instead of caves and helicopters and burning forward operating bases. Dr. Mercer could erase her with paperwork because the paperwork was real. The hospital was real. The law was real. The classified designation meant she had no defense. She couldn't produce the medals. She couldn't reference the operations. She couldn't explain that she'd performed needle decompression in vehicles taking fire, that she'd intubated patients in sandstorms with rounds going through the walls, that the difference between her skills and those of every resident in that hospital was written in scars and service records that the government had already burned. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago. 17 text messages sat on her phone from other nurses. Not your fault. We saw what happened. He's an asshole. They were kind. They were also powerless. They had careers to protect. The second erasure was cleaner than the first. No ceremony. No briefing. Just security at the door and a box of personal items and the sound of her badge being deactivated at the main entrance, a small beep that meant she no longer existed within these walls. At some point during the night shift, the mute ranger in room for 12 would wake to a new nurse. Someone with credentials that mattered. Someone Dr. Mercer hadn't trained himself to despise. The ranger wouldn't know that she'd been there. The shrapnel that had destroyed his speech center had also stolen his ability to recognize the captain who'd carried him 6 miles through enemy fire, who'd pressed a bandage into his shoulder while rounds snapped past, who'd promised, "I've got you, stay with me, I've got you." He'd wake tomorrow and see a stranger's face, and the name on his forearm would mean nothing. She was crying. She realized this only when the waitress placed a fresh napkin box on the table without being asked. "You okay, honey?" the waitress asked, and Megan couldn't answer because no answer existed. She wasn't okay. She was erased twice and might never be found again. The next morning came whether she was ready or not. Sunlight through the Waffle House windows. The trucker had left. New people had replaced him. The world kept moving. It always did. She returned to Cedar Creek Medical at noon. Not to beg. Not to fight. Just to collect what was hers. Her locker sat in the staff room where it always had, already half emptied. Someone had taken her trauma shears, the ones with her military call sign engraved on the handle. Small losses. Paper cuts compared to the rest. she was folding her second pair of scrubs when she heard footsteps. Her son, 17 years old, tall enough now that he had to duck slightly in the doorway. In his hands, a showbox. The kind that held sneakers, or old photographs, or things you couldn't bear to throw away. "Mom," he said, and his voice had his father's steadiness, "they need to see these." "No," she told him, the first word she'd spoken aloud since the security escort. Her voice came out raw. "Those don't exist anymore." But he was already moving, already walking down the hallway toward the main administrative area, the showbox held against his chest like something sacred. She followed because you followed your child, even when you couldn't follow yourself. She was packing her locker the next afternoon when her 17-year-old son walked into the Cedar Creek Medical lobby carrying a showbox. Marcus, she'd named him after the ranger, though nobody knew that, moved through the hallways with the same purposeful stride she'd taught him, the same composure under pressure. He found her in the nurse's station, told her quietly, "Mom, they need to see these," and she knew. She knew before he opened the box. Some truths you carry in your bones. The walk to administration felt like walking through water. Each step took an hour. Dr. Mercer was at the desk filing her termination paperwork when Marcus upended the showbox and let the medals scatter across the polished surface like dropped coins. The silver star. The bronze star with velar device. 2 purple hearts, each one heavy with what it meant, what it cost. They landed with soft metallic sounds against the desktop, and the room stopped breathing. Dr. Mercer's face went pale. Not the pale of understanding, the pale of a man watching his own erasure begin, frame by frame, right in front of him. Megan didn't move. Didn't explain. Didn't defend. She simply stood there, hands at her sides, watching him watch the medals. This was how apex predators killed, by being still while the world moved around them. The silence stretched like a living thing. The mute ranger had been wheeled down for physical therapy at exactly that moment. Marcus Webb. 2 years of silence. 2 years of a man locked inside his own skull, unable to speak, unable to recognize the faces of people who loved him. The shrapnel that destroyed his speech center had also erased his ability to form new memories of faces, though his muscle memory kept the voice of his captain alive somewhere in the deep structures of his brain, waiting. He saw the medals first. The silver star caught the fluorescent light and threw it back like a signal. Then his lips moved. Barely. A single word, rough and cracked from disuse, like a voice being born from the bottom of the ocean, Valkyrie. Megan's breath caught. Not visibly. Not in any way the room could see. But internally, something shifted. He remembered. Not her face, the shrapnel had stolen that. But her name. Her call sign from the Hindu Kush. The one she'd whispered into radio static during extractions, the one that meant the angels were coming, that someone was bringing the wounded home. The hospital volunteer at the desk, a retired Marine named Clayton with a scar through his left eyebrow, reached down and picked up the silver star. His hand shook. He read the citation aloud, his voice steady despite the tremor, for conspicuous gallantry while leading a rescue operation under heavy fire in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Captain Megan O'Brien coordinated the extraction of 27 personnel from a combat situation that should not have had survivors. Dr. Mercer tried to interrupt. This is irrelevant to the hospital policy violations. But the hospital CEO was already stepping out of the elevator. She wasn't alone. A 2-star general in dress blues entered the hallway behind her, and a woman in a dark suit whose eyes held the kind of weight that came from reading classified documents. The woman spoke first. Captain O'Brien operates under the designation Copper Sunrise. This facility just threatened a Pentagon asset during active cover status. That was a mistake. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact, the way you describe gravity or the color of blood. What happened next spread faster than infection. A bystander's cell phone video of Dr. Mercer at the vending machine. Nurse O'Brien thinks watching YouTube videos makes her a doctor, uploaded to social media at 3:22 p.m. and was shared 45,000 times within 6 hours. The caption that spread with it was simple: Dr. Mock's decorated war hero nurse. Local news ran the story by 6 o'clock. By evening, his Ivy League credentials meant nothing against the viral image of a distinguished surgeon looking small and cruel and infinitely petty. By 8:43 p.m., an email arrived in newsrooms across Savannah from the head of surgery at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Mercer's own medical school mentor. A man with 3 Navy commendations and a Distinguished Service Medal. His statement was 13 words long: "I am ashamed to have trained Dr. Mercer and formally request the State Medical Board review his fitness to practice." 13 words. That was all it took. The hospital board convened in emergency session. They discovered something in Mercer's documentation trail that changed everything. The 17-page complaint had been written before her termination was even scheduled. The filing dates didn't match the incident dates. The timestamps showed premeditation. And then the lawyer showed Mercer the real problem: the patient with the missed rib fracture, the one who'd seizing, the one whose pneumothorax Megan had decompressed in 40 seconds. That patient was Mercer's post-surgical case. Mercer's follow-up exam. Mercer's clearance that had sent the man home with a fracture that would have killed him in his sleep. The documentation trail Mercer had created to destroy her was now evidence of his own negligence. Of his arrogance. Of the fact that a nurse with no credentials had caught what an Ivy League surgeon had missed. The CEO called him into her office at 11:15 p.m. Offered him a choice, presented with the gentleness of someone executing someone else's will: resign quietly, with a severance package, with a story about pursuing other opportunities, or face a formal investigation that would end with his license revoked and his reputation destroyed, not just in Savannah but everywhere. The lawyer showed him the documentation. Showed him how his own paper trail condemned him. He resigned at midnight. Security escorted him out of Cedar Creek Medical at 12:23 a.m., the same guard, ironically, who'd walked Megan out the day before. The guard didn't make eye contact. Nobody did. The shame was a physical thing, something you could smell like ozone after a defibrillator. 2 weeks later, Dr. Mercer was teaching CPR to community college students at Savannah Technical College for $16 an hour. He'd given a fake name on the application. Didn't matter. Residents from Cedar Creek kept showing up in his classes. They'd recognize him. They'd pull out their phones and show him the news articles, the viral videos, the fallen career playing on repeat for strangers to watch and comment on. The humiliation was complete and inexorable. It was the kind of public destruction that never ended. Every new hire would Google his name eventually, and they would find him here, teaching chest compressions for less money than he used to spend on coffee. The trembling wasn't fear. It was the sound of a man watching his entire identity dissolve. But Megan wasn't finished. Not even close. She returned to room for 12 as the fluorescent lights hummed their eternal hospital song. Back in her scrubs. Back where she was supposed to be. The ranger was sitting up now, his eyes tracking the doorway, and when she entered, something shifted in his expression. Not recognition. The shrapnel had stolen that. But something deeper, a resonance, a frequency his body remembered even if his mind didn't. She sat on the edge of the bed without speaking. The folded flag lay in her hands, the one she'd kept in her locker all these years, the one that belonged to Lance Corporal Daniel Reeves, who'd covered their extraction in the Hindu Kush and hadn't made it home. She'd carried him home in her memory. Now she carried his flag. The ranger reached out with a trembling hand, not fear, she understood now, restraint, and touched the edge of the flag with reverence. "You carried me," he whispered, his voice rough as sandpaper, words dragged from some vault deep in his chest. 6 miles. You kept saying, his voice cracked. The tears came, but they came quietly. Megan finished the sentence she'd repeated like a prayer through that valley: "I've got you. Just stay with me." He nodded. They sat like that in the humming fluorescent light, past and present collapsing into a single moment. The muscle memory of his voice, her voice on the radio, the one that meant help was coming, had been preserved in the parts of his brain the shrapnel couldn't reach. Love carved deeper pathways than consciousness. The hospital CEO had offered her the ER director position. Megan declined. "I need night shift trauma," she'd said simply. "That's where I'm needed." The CEO understood immediately. Some people weren't built for administration. Some people were built to save lives in the dark when nobody else was watching. As she walked past the vending machine where Mercer had humiliated her, a new resident paused and nodded respectfully. The resident had read the news coverage, had seen the medals, had understood, finally, what was standing in front of her. Megan bought her coffee and returned to her rounds. The world hadn't changed. The antiseptic smell still clung to everything. The cold steel still bit at her fingers. When the helicopter sounds came, the ones from memory, the ones from 17 years ago, her hand sometimes shook. But now when that happened, the staff understood why. They'd seen the videos. They'd read the citations. They knew. Some truths, once revealed, couldn't be hidden again. The quiet nurse with the competent hands had always been a captain. The hero had always been here, pushing meds and holding the dying in the dark, asking nothing for it except the chance to do it again tomorrow. The ranger's voice grew stronger with each passing week. He learned to speak again, word by painful word, each syllable a reconstruction of the man he'd been before the shrapnel. Megan was there for most of it, though she never stayed longer than her shift required. The general arranged for his transfer to a specialized VA facility where they could continue rebuilding his speech and his sense of self. Sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know what you could do, someone who mistook your silence for weakness or your compassion for softness, hit that subscribe button. Because these stories are everywhere. They're the nurse with classified service. They're the janitor who used to run special operations. They're the person beside you who survived things that would destroy most people. Comment down below, have you ever judged someone and been dead wrong about them? And like this video if you believe the real heroes are the ones nobody sees coming.